Raymond Douglas sat in the high-backed leather chair of his study, staring into the fire that crackled and hissed in the marble fireplace. The mansion around him was quiet, its silence heavy and unsettling. From the windows, he could see the glittering city far below, skyscrapers gleaming under the night sky, but none of it stirred him. What good were all those towers, those lights, when he felt so utterly alone within his fortress of stone and steel? He was a man who had everything, or so people thought. A net worth in the billions, houses in London, Paris, and New York, a fleet of luxury cars, and art pieces in his collection worth more than entire neighborhoods. The newspapers called him a success story, a visionary, an icon. But behind those headlines lived a man consumed by mistrust. Years of betrayal had carved that into him like scars that refused to fade. He had once been trusting. He had once believed in loyalty, in love, in companionship. That was before he had been cheated out of millions by partners who swore they were family. Before his cousin had forged signatures and nearly bankrupted one of his companies. Before the woman he loved, his own wife, had walked out of his life with another man, leaving him with bitterness and a hole in his chest that no amount of wealth could ever fill. Since then, he had trusted no one, not even those who worked under his roof. The staff in his mansion came and went like shadows. He paid them well, but he kept them at a distance. The chefs, the drivers, the gardeners, all were replaceable. All could betray him if given the chance. He told himself. That night, the mansion felt different. Raymond sat alone at the long mahogany dining table, the chandelier's golden light spilling down on a meal he couldn't bring himself to touch. The chefs had outdone themselves, laying out roasted lamb, seasoned vegetables, and a dessert cart lined with delicacies. Yet the food sat untouched, growing cold as the minutes stretched into hours. He didn't even notice. His mind was elsewhere, trapped in a loop, replaying a single moment over and over, the sight of Elena gently shutting the safe and whispering words that had cut deeper than any betrayal ever had. He had prepared himself to feel vindicated. He had expected to confirm what he always believed, that every person had a price, and given the chance, they would snatch at fortune without hesitation. But instead, Elena had left him shaken to his core. She hadn't even looked at the money with hunger. She hadn't hovered in temptation, calculating what she could get away with. She had closed the door with care and spoken words that stripped him bare. This isn't treasure, it's a prison. It was such a simple observation, yet it carried the weight of truth. For years, Raymond had lived behind locks and gates, thinking himself safe. He had built a fortress of wealth and mistrust, keeping people at arm's length. But in the process, he had locked himself away from the very things that made life worth living: companionship, laughter, warmth. He stared at the empty chair across from him at the dining table, the place his wife once sat before she left, before she showed him that even love had a price in her eyes. How many nights had he eaten alone since then? How many conversations had died before they could even begin because he believed every word people spoke was just a step toward betrayal? His jaw tightened as he realized just how empty the years had become. The clock chimed in the distance, pulling him from his thoughts. It was nearly time for Elena to leave. He hesitated, torn between letting the night slip into silence and confronting what had happened. But something inside him, something he hadn't felt in years, pushed him to act. A vulnerability. He had buried deep whispered that if he didn't speak now, if he didn't acknowledge what she had shown him, he would lose a chance to step out of the cage he had built for himself. He pressed the button on the table that summoned staff. A few minutes later, Elena appeared at the doorway. She looked surprised to see him still at the table, though she masked it with her usual calm demeanor. Her apron was neatly folded, her hair tied back in its usual bun, her expression respectful yet reserved. "You asked for me, sir," she said softly. Raymond rose slowly from his chair, his hands tightening at his sides as he tried to find the words. For a man who had commanded boardrooms and delivered speeches to thousands, it was strange how difficult it was to speak to one maid standing quietly before him. "Yes," he managed, his voice low. "Please, come in." She stepped into the room, her eyes flicking briefly to the untouched food before settling back on him. "Is something wrong?" she asked cautiously. Raymond let out a breath that trembled. He turned away for a moment, walking toward the fireplace as if he could gather courage from its warmth. When he finally faced her again, his eyes were uncharacteristically raw. "Elena," he said slowly, "I need to confess something to you." Her brow furrowed slightly, though she stayed silent, waiting. "I left the safe open tonight," he admitted, his voice cracking at the edges. On purpose. I wanted to see what you would do. Her lips parted slightly, surprise flickering across her face, though she remained composed. I've been betrayed too many times, Raymond continued, pacing as he spoke, his emotions spilling out in ways he hadn't allowed in decades. By business partners I trusted, by family I thought loved me, by the woman I gave my life to. Every single one of them proved me right, that no matter what they said, no matter what mask they wore, they would always choose money when given the chance. So I thought, why should you be different? Why should anyone be different? He stopped, looking at her with tired, haunted eyes. I expected you to steal from me. Elena lowered her gaze, her hands clasped in front of her apron. I see, she said softly. And yet, you were wrong. Yes, he whispered, his throat tightening. I was wrong. You didn't take a single thing. You closed the safe. And then, his voice broke as tears welled in his eyes, shocking even himself. And then you said something I can't stop hearing. You said my treasure was a prison. Do you realize what those words did to me? She looked up at him then, her eyes steady, her expression filled with something he hadn't seen in years, compassion, not greed. I didn't mean to hurt you, sir, she said gently. It wasn't meant as judgment. I only spoke what I saw. People think money buys freedom, but often it builds walls instead. I've worked in many houses before yours. I've seen families torn apart by inheritance, marriages broken by greed, children who only visit their parents when they need something. I've seen wealth surround people like a fortress, but inside that fortress, they are lonelier than the poorest man on the street. Raymond felt his tears slide down his cheeks, hot and heavy. He didn't even bother to wipe them away. That's me, he whispered. That's my life. I thought keeping my fortune locked away kept me safe, but all it's done is lock me away from the world. I set a trap for you, Elena, but in truth, it's me who has been trapped all along. Elena stepped forward slightly, her voice still calm, though filled with quiet strength. Then you can choose to step out of it. You may be rich in money, sir, but life is meant to be rich in people, in trust, in kindness. Those are treasures no safe can hold. Her words pierced him deeper than any deal or contract ever had. For the first time in decades, Raymond felt something stir within him, hope. A fragile, tentative hope that perhaps his life wasn't destined to end in solitude, surrounded only by steel doors and silent halls. He sank into a chair, his shoulders heavy, his composure shattered. He buried his face in his hands, his sobs filling the empty dining hall. Elena, startled, hesitated at first, unsure if she should comfort him. But then, with gentle courage, she stepped closer and placed a hand on his shoulder. Sir, she said quietly, tears don't make you weak. They make you human. Raymond lifted his gaze, his eyes red and swollen, but for once, he didn't feel shame in his vulnerability. He felt lighter. I don't remember the last time I cried, he admitted. I don't remember the last time I even spoke honestly to someone. I've been living in shadows for so long that I forgot what it means to trust. And yet, Elena replied softly, here you are, trusting me with your tears. Something inside him cracked open then, something he had sealed away long ago. He realized how desperately he had been craving this, for someone to see him not as a millionaire, not as a fortress of wealth, but as a man. A flawed, lonely man longing for connection. That night, Raymond didn't allow her to leave immediately. Instead, he asked her to sit with him. At first, Elena looked hesitant, uncomfortable breaking the barrier between employer and servant, but when she saw the sincerity in his eyes, she agreed. They sat in the study, sipping tea while the fire crackled in the background. Raymond found himself speaking more than he ever expected. He told her stories of his childhood, of how he built his empire from nothing, of how betrayal after betrayal hardened him until he could no longer recognize himself. Elena listened quietly, occasionally nodding, occasionally offering gentle words. She didn't flatter him, she didn't pity him, she simply listened, and that alone was more valuable than anything he had locked away in his safe. For hours, the mansion echoed not with silence, but with voices, with laughter, with the sound of human connection that had been absent for so long. For the first time in years, Raymond didn't feel like a prisoner of his own wealth. He felt like a man rediscovering what it meant to be alive. As the night drew to a close, Elena rose to leave. I should go, sir. It's late. Raymond stood with her, his eyes filled with gratitude. Elena, he said softly, you may think you're just my maid, but tonight, you gave me something no amount of money ever could. You reminded me that honesty still exists. That compassion still exists. That hope still exists. His voice broke again, but this time he smiled through the tears. I set a trap for you, but you've set me free. Elena gave him a small, gentle smile. Then keep yourself free, sir. Don't lock it all away again. As she walked out of the mansion, Raymond stood at the doorway, watching her go. For once, the safe in his study didn't matter. The stacks of money, the jewels, the documents, all of it seemed insignificant compared to what he had discovered that night. The greatest treasure he had wasn't behind steel doors. It was the honesty of a woman who had shown him that life was more than wealth, more than suspicion, more than fear. And as he closed the door, Raymond Douglas wiped his tears, a strange warmth settling in his chest. For the first time in decades, he no longer felt alone.